Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation for social impacts of video games. My name is Richard Dare and today I will be discussing the social and cultural impacts of video games within our society. Here I've defined 4 types of games: popular games, mechanically full games, casual games, and narrative-based games, which I believe have the most weight in the world in terms of games that generate communities and keep people coming back to play the games because of the games themselves. Beginning with popular games, I define 2 games as being popular: League of Legends and Fortnite Battle Royale. The reason why both of these games are popular is because of the high player base for each game, the active community that exists for each game, constant updates that developers provide, as well as simply the game mechanics of each game are accessible and open for just about anyone. Starting with League of Legends, it's a game, a MOBA specifically, that has over 100 million active players. As I mentioned before, there's persistent updates and changes which keep the game alive with new characters and balancing. And it's a low graphical fidelity game which makes it easy for people to download it and play it on their machines. You could see a simple screenshot right here, and you could see that the graphics are kind of simplistic. The UI is very simple. The PNGs are not large. The JPEGs aren't large here. There's not too much to download, which definitely makes sense with why I defined it as, well, baby's first MOBA. It's baby's first MOBA because, well, maybe not a baby could pick it up, but definitely a 5 or 6-year-old could download it onto their computer and play it with just very little restriction. League of Legends is a game that only requires people to play for about 20 to 40 minutes at a time, sometimes 60 minutes, but the mechanics within the game, which allow for players to surrender after 20 minutes, just makes it a much more casual experience than a more hardcore type of game like Dota 2, for example. It's a game that has a lot of leniency in terms of being a multiplayer online battle arena game, yet it still keeps the fundamentals of that 5v5 structure alive and provides players with exciting characters to pick up and master themselves. League is so popular because it provides players with a number of different options and play styles for them to choose from, and the fact that it could play on just about any machine means that you could play with just about any of your friends. It's not like you would need to buy a whole gaming PC just to play League of Legends, but you probably would have to buy a whole gaming PC just to play a game like Dota, for example. Here you could see one of the most recent tournaments of League of Legends, and you could see the audience here. It's jam-packed. They're really excited to see these professional esports players play one of their favorite games. You could definitely go on to Reddit and see subreddits filled with League of Legends players discussing ideas and changes and what they like about the game and what they don't like about the game. So it's a game that's very much alive. It has a community of people who are willing to communicate and converse. However, it is sometimes known as one of the most toxic communities out there. So be forewarned when you're trying to jump in and play a game. You may get an angry Karthus, or you may get an angry player who is just going to flame you for making the choices that you make. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means that there's so many people playing the game that there's even some bad people along with the good people. Moving on, we go to Fortnite Battle Royale, which is a game that has taken the world by storm. It has over 45 million players who have downloaded the game, with 3 million players playing on the average just about every month. It's very simplistic with accessible gameplay, but it has this room for growth and expansion that not many other games in its genre actually have. It pretty much defined the Battle Royale game type with its structure and with its systems. It's a free-to-play game, which means that just about anyone can pick it up, which has attributed to its success and its popularity. It exists on just about every platform, from PC to consoles to even your phone. Literally anyone can pick up this game and play it. And that's what kind of makes it so exciting, especially for the developers. They know that anyone could play their game and purchase their cosmetics, which are always on a change for the developers. They are always changing the available cosmetics, which gets people excited to pick them up because they're on a limited time each and every couple of days or so. In terms of gameplay, the game follows a very unique structure of battling, gathering, and building, and you could kind of move interchangeably between these three. You kind of move in a cycle with these three. So what a normal scenario might look like is you're in a battle, you're shooting, but you're running low on ammo, so you know that you don't want to waste your bullets. So you start to build up your own cover to hide behind it, and at the same time you locate a nearby tree or wall, and you start breaking that down because you gather resources which will allow you to build more things, which will allow you to build maybe even higher up, and then you can get a better vantage point on your enemies so you can battle them and shoot them down. And then when they're done, when they're dead, you could go up to their corpse and you could gather their loot, their guns, and their materials, and the cycle continues as you move on out. And that's pretty much the simple structure of the game. Where the complexity comes in is your aim, and it comes in your gathering skills, it comes in how you build things. And it has a very high skill ceiling, which attributes to its popularity in a sense. While it's easy to get into, it's definitely very hard to actually master and win the game. What the game features is a variety in weapons, resources, collectibles, challenges, and unlockables. To go over it briefly, there's a rarity system for weapons from normal all the way up to legendary, and essentially the rarity means that your weapons are more strong or accurate. There are 3 resources to collect: wood, brick, and stone. Actually, there are 3 resources to collect. There's wood, brick, and steel, which each provide more or less cover depending on the resource. They could eat up more bullets that are shot at it, or eat up less bullets. There's plenty of collectibles within the world as well, including traps, and there's many challenges for the player to accomplish in terms to level themselves up and unlock new cosmetics and things like that. But you could also pay real world money to change how your character looks in game, but you cannot purchase any sort of edge over your enemies. You could only purchase what is simply cosmetic. So popular games, they're very popular. They have a lot of players, and their impact is pretty much seen mostly within the communities themselves. For most of these games on this list, the change and the impact does mostly exist within the people who are playing the games, from friends who are discussing new tactics to enemies as they are fighting each other, trying to find the best way to defeat each other. There are games like these that stick because they allow for growth, but in terms of providing a lot of growth, you're really going to want a mechanically full game, because they provide a lot more room to expand than simply just these popular games. Diving in on these mechanically full games, we have Dota 2 and Divinity Original Sin. And the reason why they're mechanically full, what mechanically full even means, is that its systems are very finely tuned, that everything just makes sense in-game. And even out of game, like in terms of controlling the game, you're utilizing every key that you can. You're utilizing every facet of your mind that you can. You're trying to communicate with your team and cooperate with them. And also making sure that you keep up with the practical part of pressing the right keys at the right time. That's what a game like Dota 2 is. You're strategizing from the very beginning, and you're ensuring that you keep up with your strategy up until the very end, or else you risk letting everything fall apart. Divinity is a similar game, but unlike Dota, which is a MOBA like League of Legends, Divinity you're playing mostly by yourself. It's a single-player game which does allow for cooperative play, but for the most part, you're going to be interacting with NPCs, conversing with them, and having them join your team, and then you construct like the best team to take on the world and complete the story itself. It's unlike Dota because Dota is a game which, well, it has 560,000 active players, which Divinity definitely does not have. It faces regular updates and changes, and has a high graphical fidelity system with particle effects and other factors which may make it hard for simple PCs to run the game, which has definitely kept a lot of players from playing the game itself. Yet it has over hundreds of characters and items to choose from, which allows for a lot of customization and a lot of different choices to be made within each specific game. The defining features for Dota include its full utilization of the keyboard and the mind, as I was speaking about before. You could literally bind just about every key to do some sort of action. There's plenty of other mechanics within the game, including denying and this courier. So denying is when you deny your own minion or creep from the enemy, providing yourself with experience, and you're canceling the experience and gold that would be going in the way of the enemy. It's a mechanic like this which differentiates Dota from League of Legends, simply because Dota 2 considered just about every action of its game and what players could be open to doing. Denying is a system that they did not need to incorporate within the game for it to work, in my opinion. But they included it simply because, well, they could, and it gave an extra level of skill for those pros playing the game. The courier, which is a sort of intermediary that delivers items to players as they are battling in the lane, is something that just spices up the action. It's not the same sort of ritual as in League of Legends, where you may be fighting and farming in lane for golden experience, and when you have enough gold, you buy your item, but you have to teleport all the way back to your base to pick it up, and then you walk all the way back to base pretty much every time, unless you die, and then you pick up your item in base when you respawn. The courier is an aspect that you would need to communicate with your teammates in controlling, because you'd want to have your items delivered to you in a proper fashion. Yet there's a lot of meta sort of topics that are discussed about, for instance, a support character shouldn't be calling the courier away from their carry when the carry has pretty important items that they will be wanting to pick up as soon as they can. But a support player doesn't have that urgency on picking up items. So the courier system is a pretty cute one. I won't go too deep into it, but you could customize your courier and you could change it up as well. It could evolve from walking to flying, and essentially you just want to talk to your teammates in terms of like not taking it from them when they're calling the courier to them, because that would just trigger them, and that would just trigger other players within the game as well. Lastly, I just want to discuss the balanced heroes and items. Well, there are a lot of people who would actually say that all of the heroes in Dota 2 are overpowered, and that's what makes them balanced. And that's kind of true in a sense. There are very strong skills that many characters have. Sometimes a character will have 4 really strong skills, and when you compare that to a character in League of Legends, they just don't compare. They just don't line up. The Dota 2 characters would just whoop the asses of all the League of Legends characters, and that just goes without a doubt. It's an aspect of the game that the developers really take into mind, and it's not something that makes the game unfair or unbalanced in any way. You know that heroes are overpowered, and you have to play the game in a specific manner because of that. And that's what makes the game so interesting. You could be very reactionary within the game. But the only real way to experience this is by picking up the game and actually playing it itself, which I definitely recommend to as many people as possible. Dota tournaments are very exciting and very large. The International is a very prominent tournament for the Dota community, and it's something that Steam and Valve, the producers of the game, actually take very seriously as well. During the time of the International tournament, they will sell an item in the Dota store known as the Battle Pass. And for every Battle Pass purchased, the funds are, well, not all of the funds, but a percentage of the funds are sent to the overall prize pool, which has made the last international prize pool $25 million. And that goes to the pro esports players who win the game at the very end. So it's a very exciting time for a lot of Dota players. It's a time like this where I find myself discussing more tactics with my friends, and I know that on the subreddits, on Reddit, that people are discussing just what's happening within the tournament and any new announcements that the game developers might be making as well. The game is very much alive, even though there are a lot of memes and jokes that call it a dead game. It's a game that's always evolving and always changing. It's definitely surpassed my expectations for a game, and always keeps it fresh by adding new and exciting characters, items, and balance changes. Moving to Divinity Original Sin, which is a game that I define as an old school RPG with fresh graphics and mechanics. It definitely follows in suit of a game like Baldur's Gate, and it provides a lot of narrative and conversation for players to dwell in. While the game has only had 100,000 active players at its peak, it has about 9,000 current users about every day. It has a number of classes, items, skills, and other options for you to customize your character with and your entire experience, as well as having many choices for you to make in terms of conversing with people in the world. The NPCs, that is. I give this game the gold standard of RPGs. This is what most RPGs should try to be living up to. The three main factors that exist within the game is its leveling system, resource management system, and strategizing systems. So in terms of leveling, the game is very finely tuned in terms of how you obtain experience. There's a limited amount of enemies that you could take down for experience, and a limited amount of quests that you could accomplish for gaining experience. For the most part, you'll find yourself actually behind the enemies that you're facing, unless you're really good at completing the quests, which are pretty mysterious and hard to decipher how to accomplish sometimes. The game is very much about resource management and finding items throughout the world, exploring as much as you can, and finding out ways to unlock the chests so that you could get the next best equipment and the next best items for yourself and for your party members. When you're playing on the normal difficulty, you're pretty much going to be forced to use the items that you're finding throughout the world. You're going to have to find a way to sort of make yourself stronger if you can't. Maybe you want to sell some of your items to one of your friends for a lot of gold, and then you'll buy like a nice ring or something. Essentially, the game gives you a lot of room to strategize and come up with options for accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of room and factors which will allow you to get the upper hand on your enemies, or will allow you to sneak past them without them ever even noticing. So some defining features of Divinity include its very many weapons, armors, and classes, as well as its skills, consumables, the dungeons, and enemies that you encounter. And it also has a really good narrative with really quirky characters and some pretty serious stuff that happens every now and again. Would have to recommend picking it up and playing it to really see the variety that exists within the game, but it simply is one of the finest role-playing epics of all time. Though it doesn't have the community quite like League of Legends, Fortnite, or Dota 2, Divinity Original Sin is a game which definitely changed my life in some sense because of just how finely tuned of an RPG it is. It was exactly what I was looking for, and it came about at the time exactly when I was looking for it. I really can't recommend enough picking it up. So it's games like mechanically full games which bring people back, bring people playing their games because they want to master it to its highest extent. It's for a lot of intellectuals in a sense. It's for people who definitely want to push themselves to the limit and accomplish as much as they can. Very unlike that is casual games, which require very little amount of user input necessarily, but they can be pretty big time sinks. But for the most part, you're just playing the game to enjoy yourself, and then you might find yourself hopping out, or you may find yourself addicted to the game and playing it as much as you possibly can. So the examples that I outlined here are Farmville, Clash of Clans, MapleStory, and Candy Crush Saga. Essentially any game that you could play on your phone would be deemed as almost casual, simply because it's easy to pick up, it's easy to hop in, and it's also easy to get out. There's not any sort of time restriction. You're not locked into a game like Dota 2, for example, which will lock you in for an hour. In Farmville, you're not locked into the game at all. You could plant some corn, and then all you need to do is click the X button, and you're out of the game. That's what defines a casual game. And though they may not be so highly regarded by hardcore gamers out there, they definitely have their place within the community and in society overall. Most players actually are casual gamers. Even my mom is a casual gamer. She plays Candy Crush on her PC. It's a genre of games which is open for just about everyone. And a casual game is designed for just about anyone to be able to pick up and to master as well. A casual game isn't necessarily hard to master. While you may be looking at MapleStory and think that, yeah, that might be a harder game to master, it definitely is the least casual of the casual games here. But I included it there because it allows for a lot of choice. It allows for a lot of experience to go into the game. A player can choose their class and play the game pretty much without much hassle. It doesn't require that many key combinations. Yet it almost does have that level of complexity that a game like Dota would have, because it is an MMO RPG, unlike the other games on this list. So casual games find their influence from the people who play it. It's not that common that people will go around talking about their experience in Candy Crush, however, which is why the social impact of this game really isn't as large as its cultural impact. There are a lot of people who are actually into playing casual games just for a little bit. They get in and they get out, and that was their experience. That may have made their life just a little bit more excitable for that period of time. Me personally, I really enjoy narrative-based games because they're what really tells a story and what actually has that social and cultural weight existing within the game itself. One of the best examples that I could think of is Shin Megami Tensei 4, which is a Nintendo 3DS game that is driven by story and is driven by moral choices. It has an alignment system that all the characters within the game essentially follow, and even you as the player will find yourself grouping yourself into one of these categories of either neutrality, chaos, or order. It's a game that weighs you up against the decisions of choosing whether or not you want to side with God or if you want to side with Satan. It really puts you at the hardest choice in your life. And for me personally, like, as I played the game and experienced it through, it really made me feel as if the choices that I made within the game were real and they had impact. And I simply could not look at the world the same after playing this game. And that's only something that could really be experienced by playing through the game from start to finish. But it is a product of the multiple endings and branching paths that the game presents to the player. There's not so much choice in the game, but there are at least 4 to 5 endings for this game that players will have to move themselves throughout the game itself in terms of talking with certain characters at key points throughout the game. So there's an endless number of character personalities that you could get into the game. If you're comparing this to a game like Pokemon, there's essentially 500 plus Pokemon demons that you can encounter. And it's not as simple as catching these demons with a demon ball. You have to actually converse with them and appeal to their essentially morality. But sometimes they're a little bit random, but for the most part, if a character is neutral, they're going to want a neutral response. If they're chaotic, they're going to want something that's more chaotic, and so on and so forth. The game presents a very immersive and believable world with a lot of ties to reality. The game actually tells a story of a post-apocalyptic world in which the only vestitude of hope left on Earth is Tokyo, and over the fallout, a new kingdom is actually being created by God. And you find yourself as a inhabitant of the kingdom of God, and you don't even know what's happening in Tokyo until you play through the game for about 10 to 20 hours. Since the game is very difficult in a sense much like Dark Souls or any really hard RPG, it was part of the experience for me to overcome the humps of difficulty. And it was definitely part of the storyline itself, feeling myself being just incapable of taking down these foes that I was facing. And then eventually finding out just the right way to go about it, what the correct strategies are, and essentially finding out the mechanics of the game. I sometimes wish I could go back to not knowing anything of the game so that I could experience it one more time, because it was such an emotional experience from start to finish, where I did find myself emotionally driven either to the point of tears or rage, of excitement, time after time, after fighting certain enemies and seeing certain cutscenes. It's definitely one of the strongest narrative experiences I've ever faced, and it's simply a game for the Nintendo 3DS. Some more examples I would like to discuss very briefly are Portal 2, which is a game that is a puzzle game in which you experience some emotional bonds to an AI, which is essentially keeping you hostage. Portal 1 and Portal 2 are very simple games which tell a very fine and strong narrative over the course of very little actual dialogue. It's very finely crafted in that sense, in a similar way that the Stanley Parable is crafted. I would only recommend playing the Stanley Parable if you want to experience a number of quirky different scenarios and narratives. It's not as emotional as a game like Shin Megami Tensei, Portal, or Persona, but it's definitely a game which will have you laughing and wondering, why exactly is this happening? Persona 5 is very similar to Shin Megami Tensei because it technically is a Shin Megami Tensei game. It's made by the same developer and talks about a lot of the same themes in Tokyo, of how there are people who take advantage of others and are simply just not nice people, and you have to find the way to change their heart. I actually found myself crying more in Persona than in Shin Megami Tensei, simply because it's a much more believable scenario. You're actually like a high school student trying to solve high school problems, and in the real world, and it's a very well done game, and there's not enough information on this slide for me to go over it fully. Fallout 3, which is the last narrative example that I'll be going over, is a game which provides you a lot of choices in terms of conversation and the way you want to go about things, and you essentially experience the story that you want to find and that you want to experience. It's a game like Fallout, it's a game like Skyrim, which have these open world areas that you could just travel through and encounter random stuff, and encounter random NPCs, and treat them however you want to treat them. It gives you the options to do just about anything in a Bethesda game. So though these narrative-based games may not have such lively communities as games like League of Legends and Dota, they have the benefit of actually leaving players with a story that matters, a story that actually may change their perception of their reality, which is exactly what happened with Shin Megami Tensei for me. My whole reality really changed after I struggled through the game and made it all the way through, and the characters spoke to me, and they actually spoke to my heart, and they told me the honest truth of reality. I feel as if you need a balance of all four of these aspects in really making a long-lasting game, a game that actually has impact. You're going to want a game that will have these pop elements that anyone can pick up and access, yet you want there to be a lot of systems to push them to the very limit of their skill ability. You want it to be accessible to the point of casualness, yet I do care a lot more about having a mechanically full environment of narratively driven scenarios and actions for players to take. So last but not least, what is the lasting impact of games? From Pong to Call of Duty, we find ourselves in a society of gamers. And games come in many different shapes and sizes. Monopoly is a game, Solitaire is a game. Games bring people together. They could also bring people apart, like Smash Bros. Or Super Mario Party. It's games like these which you may find yourself coming closer to your friends or further from them, but it's all part of what a game truly does. While a lot of developers may not think about it, games really do create communities, and you could check Reddit and you could see that there are communities that actually thrive with the ideas that are being discussed and challenged within their games, and they actually are curious about the ideas of other players who like the same games that they like. Games have existed all throughout time and have appeared in all these different forms. What does the future of games look like? I'm not too sure, but I really hope that I have some say in where it goes. Because you know me, I'll definitely be making a game that's like Shin Megami Tensei and Dota all together, and it is a game that really makes you think about life and will probably leave you crying just about every time. Games will exist through society from now until the very end of society, I believe. They may even evolve and surpass society in a sense, but that's something that we could discuss in another video. Overall, this has been my presentation on the social and cultural impacts of video games. Once again, my name is Richard Dare, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining me.